Hey guys, welcome back. This time I want to talk to you about the export settings from Clo to Blender. There's been some updates and I just want to make a video explaining clearly how to get from Clo into Blender. If you guys like these videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. It's a big help. Leave your comments down below and check the link in the description for Discord and Patreon. But for now, let's just jump into it. So here in Clo, I have my garment. It's finished. It is set up in a way that's quite specific, I guess. So I have three different materials. I have one for the neck, one for the t-shirt itself, and then one for the pockets. And then there will be another material for the buttons as well. I have some puckering applied using this puckering tool over here. So all these edges that you see highlighted in purple have these little puckering details added to them. I've added some thickness to the collar as well so that we get this nice thick look around the edge of the rib. I have top stitching applied as well on all these pink lines here, and that is, I think, visible. Yeah, this is set to texture, so this will be, we can export this as texture or we can set it to an obj. So this is how my project is set up. It's got multiple layers, it's got different thicknesses, it's got some details added to it. And then if I look in the UV editor, I have laid this out into one UV tile, so this fits quite comfortably, and I've tried to make the pieces as big as possible to fill as much of the UV space as possible. So this would now be ready to export into Blender if I'm totally happy with how this is set up and how this is working. There's a few different ways that we can export this, and I'll talk through the different versions shortly. What we want to check first is our mesh resolution. So this is set to, I think, a particle distance of 6. So this I'm happy to export, and I'm going to set this to quads for the sake of this video. So I'm selecting all these pieces, and if I look under the rendering view of the 2D layout here, I can click show mesh, and if I zoom in, this is all triangulated, so this is built of tiny little triangles. And I want to set this to, instead of mesh type triangle right at the bottom here on the property editor on the right side, if I change this mesh type to quad, we should have something that we can then subdivide in Blender if we need to. So it might take a second to remesh all of this garment. So if I just zoom out quickly, now that this is remeshed, you see that this is set to quads. These are all squares, 4-sided quads rather than 3-sided triangles. So for now, this is a little bit more useful for us to have inside Blender. You can export it as triangles as well if you want, but I'll show you a problem later that I need to fix, and it's easy to fix if we have this set to quads. So now this is ready to go. We can start to discuss the export settings. So if I want to go to Blender and I want this to be like a static thing, we're not talking about animation here. I'm going to go File, Export, and then I'm going to go to Object. There is some other options. You can set Alembic, but you'll have material troubles. GLTF I wouldn't advise working with. You could work with FBX, but there might be some scaling issues, so I always tend to work with OBJ. So I'm going to export the OBJ. I'm going to find the folder that I want to export it to, so in this case it would be this exports folder here. And I'm going to call this t-shirt thin welded. And we will look at the first type of export. So when this window comes up, there's some options we want to check. I don't want to take the avatar in my export, so I'm going to uncheck that box. I want this to be a single object, which means one object. If this is set to multiple objects, each pattern piece will be a different object, and I don't want that. I want this to be thin, and I want this to be welded. We have weld and unweld, and we're going to export all of them just to see the difference. We want unified UV coordinates to be checked so that we know we're using this UV layout here. If I uncheck this, my UV layout goes away. So make sure you have this box checked, and for now we don't want to export the textures. I'll show you how to do that like in a second. The scale we want set to meters because Blender works in meters, so M for meters is correct, 100% scale. And then the file options in the bottom we can just leave as they are. So this will export a thin welded single object, and select all graphics and trims should be clicked so that we export these trims here. So I have these buttons on the pocket. which you want to export as trims as well. So if that's all good, click OK. And then we want to export it 2 more times. So I'm going to do the same thing, export obj, and then we're going to do unwelded. So I'm going to call this one thin unwelded. Click save. Same as before, all patterns needs to be checked, avatars needs to be unchecked. Thin, this time leave this set to unweld. Ensure unified UVs coordinates are selected so that we can export the UVs. The scale should be set to meters and the file type we can leave as it is, so press OK. And then the last one we're going to do now is the thick one. So let's set this to, I'll just name this file thick. And then we want to check this thick option. So I'm going to uncheck the avatar box. The rest of this should be the same. And I'm going to click OK. The one other thing I'm going to do is just look at the top stitching options for this. So if I click over here in my top stitching property, I check this top stitching box and we look under type. This type is texture. So if I zoom in on this, I can see the stitches here. And if I look in my UV editor, my stitches are here in my texturing as well. If I set this to object or obj, those stitches are going to disappear from my texturing and then they're going to be applied as objects. So you see there's some thickness around them now. I'm going to export this as thick. Actually, let's do a thin one. So I'll export obj. We'll call this t-shirt thin unwelded. And then I'm going to put top stitch just on the back. And then I'll show you how this will affect our exports as well. So again, uncheck the avatar, thin, unweld. The rest of this we can leave as it is and click OK. And then I'm just going to set my top stitching back to texture because that's a little bit more ideal for this workflow. Okay, so now we've exported everything out of Clo. The only other thing we might want to take with it is the textures. So for now, there's not much detailing in this. I have some, visible fabric details, some normal maps and that kind of thing. So if I do want to export this texturing out of Clo, I'm going to click up here on this bake texture with the little camera on the UV island in the UV editor mode. So make sure you're in UV editor. Click this icon on the side. Choose a path. So I'm going to go to this texture exports folder, call this t-shirt 1 as an example, and click save. We want to check all tiles so that we can export the materials from every tile. This time we only have one, but we'd set this to all tiles. We want the diffuse map, the normal map. We can take roughness and metalness, and the others I don't have anything there for, so I'm not going to export them. And click save. And that will now export all those textures at a 4K resolution. So now we've exported the textures and the objects. And if I just look at what I have here in my texture exports folder, I have each of those individual texture files that I can work with. And then in my exports, I have a thick export, a thin unwelded with top stitch, and a thin welded. So this is stuff we can now import into Blender. So if we're all done with Clo, we can jump into Blender. So in Blender, I have this empty scene, and I can now start to import my objects. So I'm going to go to File, Import, and then go to OBJ. And we can now start to look at the differences in these exports. So I'm going to select all of them. I think I can import everything, but what might be interesting to look at first is the file size. So if I look at the unwelded one, it's 4 megabytes, 4.3. The welded one is 4.2, so these are very small. The thick one is 9.7, so this is almost double the size of a thin one. So there you see a jump in file size. And then the one with top stitching is way bigger. So this is now 38 megabytes with the top stitch on. And this is why I don't include top stitching as objects, because they really increase the file size, especially if you're working with animation. It's not advisable. I would do that in the texturing. So let's just import all of these and see what we've got. So let's just space them out now. So a thick one, I'm going to move to the side over here. The thin unwelded can move over here. The top stitch one, we can move over here as well. So let's look quickly at the top stitching. So you see the difference is on this model on the left, there's no visible top stitching because it's part of the texturing. And on the right, we have the top stitches set to objects. So these are a lot more three-dimensional. Depending on what it is you want to render, if you want to make a really beautiful kind of close-up shot, you might want to keep your top stitching as object. If you're not getting in that close and you have a good texturing workflow, you might be able to transfer all that into the texture. So it just depends on what you need. This one here is the welded one, and this one is the thick one. And at face value, let's just move them a bit closer. They're not that different. There's not much at face value that we can see that's different. The main thing is you'll see in the thick one, we have some more definition around this color and the edges than we do on this one because this has a different thickness applied. The main difference between the welded and the unwelded is exactly that, the welding. And what I mean by that is if I look at the unwelded and I go object into edit mode, I'm going to press L on the keyboard to just select the front UV island. So if I go into edit mode, hold my mouse over something, press L, L will select linked. So it's here on the bottom side, select linked. And if I set this to UVs, it will just select a UV island. If I were to move this now, it would move fine because nothing is stuck together, like these pattern pieces are still disconnected. That can be useful sometimes. With the welded one, it's the opposite. So if I go into edit mode here, select this welded one, press L to select that front UV, and then I grab this, you see it's still connected. Like we have all these edges connecting the front to the back and to all the other seams, which sometimes can be useful and sometimes can be a bit difficult when you're working with normal maps or edge finishing. So depending what you need, you can export the welded or the unwelded. What I would say is they all look pretty much the same when we start to apply textures to them. So let's take a look at them textured. There's each one has exported the same amount of materials that you see here. So if I look, except for the one with top stitches, this has an additional material. So they all have the jersey, the rib, and the cotton exported. So if I want to change these materials, I can do. That isn't affected, by the thick or thin. That will be done by default by Clo when you export things. So the materials will all be the same. One thing to note is the normals of this. So if I go up here and I turn on face orientation, so in this overlay section, I'm going to drop this down and turn on face orientation. You'll see the thick one is blue all over, and the other three we can see the red in the back. So the red means that that's the back of a pattern piece, and blue means it's the front of a pattern piece. So this has the correct orientation because we want the red on the inside of the garment and the blue to be on the outside. Sometimes we might need to flip things around. So like if we look at the pocket under here, this pocket should actually be flipped. So like we see the red is facing out, but we actually would want the blue to be facing out. So if I press L on my keyboard to select that, I can go to mesh, normals, and then I can just click flip. And now that has the blue side facing in the right direction. So that's because this has two layers to this pocket. Ideally, we always want the blue to be facing out. With the thick one, we see blue all around because this has two sides to it. So if I jump to this one in edit mode, select the thick one and look under edit. I'll look at the color as an example. We have a front piece, we have an inside piece, and then we have a series of edge pieces. So each part of the thickness also has a piece associated to it, which is why this file is going to be bigger because it has more surface in the export than the other ones do. It has two sides to every piece. So there's an outside, there's an inside, and there's an edge thickness, and we can adjust those as much as we need to. Let's texture this in, and then we can look at some small issues that we will see with the thick one. So for each one of these, I'm just going to set them to all have one material. So I'm just going to press minus to delete, add a new material, and call it t-shirt. And then I'm just going to apply that material to each of these meshes, because I don't need multiple materials. So last one. The only difference with this last one here is I'll turn off face orientation for a second. The only difference with this last one is we have a different material for the top stitches. So I'll keep one material for the top stitching, and then the other one will be the same as the rest, because this one has the 3D objects top stitches applied to it. For the textures now, I'm going to jump into the shading workspace. I'm just going to select one of these t-shirts and make sure we're editing the t-shirt material over here. Make sure that we have the right add-ons activated. So I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, under Add-ons, choose Node Wrangler, and make sure you have Node Wrangler checked and turned on. Choose your green principled BSDF in this shader and press Control, Shift, and T, and that will open up this window. Navigate to your textures. So I textured this in Painter, and I'm just going to select those texture files. If you've got the ones from Clo, just go to your texture exports, select them, and then click Principled Texture Setup. I'm just going to use the ones from Substance Painter, so these are my exports, and I'm going to click Principled Texture Setup. So if we look now, just turn off this displacement node. Yeah. So if we look now, they actually all look remarkably similar because the textures are the same on each one. So visually you might not have much difference. It's how we want to deal with the mesh. Like I said, the only difference here on this guy is these stitches have their own material and the rest they don't. So the issue you're going to come up with the thick one is this. If you zoom right in, you can see the edges are stretched. So like the texturing comes up like this, and then we have this rounded kind of stretching happening here. Push the normal method, but you'll see it a bit more. Like there's these lines coming around. That's not the texture that we want. The reason for that is how these are UV'd when we export this. So if I look at the thick one and I go up to the UV editing workspace, I'm going to just zoom out a little bit and then zoom in here on this one. So if I select this outside piece, you see it is visible here in my UV layout where it should be, which is fine. And then if I select my inside piece, that's also in the same position. So these guys are laid directly on top of each other. That's fine for now. Sometimes you might want your inside pieces to be on a different UV layout to, texture them differently. The thing is the edge that we want to fix. So this inside edge here, if I press L on the keyboard, I can select it, and you will see where the problem is, right? This edge has 1, 2, 3, 4 faces moving around it like this, and here on our UV layer we just have one single line of edges. So this needs to be unwrapped so that we can see this texture projected a bit better. So the easiest way to do this is press L when you're in edit mode to select the island. You want to make sure this is set to UV so it just selects that UV chunk and nothing else. To deselect, just click into the background somewhere, or you can click one of the edges here. Press L to select that piece of thickness, and then on the left side of the screen you want to select all those edges, and this is our edge here now. Go to UV and click unwrap, and you can choose angle based, and you will now have the edge fully unwrapped, but it's way too big in terms of scale. So to fix this, there's a couple things we want to check on. I'm first of all just going to select this UV island, so make sure it's selected, the one we've just unwrapped. Press S to scale it down, and then G to just kind of grab it over here where we want to have it, to apply these textures to here, where our original piece was. Now it's in this kind of curved shape, and we want to just straighten it out, which is fairly easy to do. We want to just straighten up one of these quads. So go into quad mode up here, which is the UV select 3. 1 will select vertices, 2 will select edges, and 3 on the keyboard will select the face. We want to just straighten this out now. So if you press 1, go into vertex mode, select the bottom 2, press S, Y, and then press 0, and they will straighten out and go flat in the bottom. The same on the top ones. S to scale, Y to scale the Y axis, and then 0 to straighten them out. Then we do the right side, but this time we do X. So S to scale, X to scale on the X axis, and then press 0, and that will straighten that edge out. And then the same for the other side. So S on the keyboard, X to go to the X axis, and then 0 to straighten up the alignment on the X axis. And now this face, if I go back into face select, is fully square. So this is my active quad, the one that I've selected here. And then if I press L, I select the whole rest of that island. So this is the active one because it's the one that's highlighted. And if I right click now and click follow active quads, this whole thing is going to straighten out in line with that one quad. So instead of having this curved thing, I now have this straight piece of UV island instead. If you click this arrow here, UV sync selection, I can see all my UVs now, so I can see everything that I want to work with. And then on the keyboard, I just want to press R to rotate this, and then 90 to do a 90-degree rotation. And then we want to just scale this down and just put it back where it needs to be. So we'll have to scale this up a bit, but it basically needs to finish on this edge here, right at the center front. So if we look here, this kind of just comes to the center front. Then we would have to repeat the process for the other side. For now, I think we're not that far off the center front. Just like this. Right, so I'm pressing X to scale, G to grab, and X to slide it on the X axis. And that is now in a better position. So if we look now at this in texture preview mode here, the viewport shading, and I turn off the overlays so that I don't have to see this, the problem hasn't gone because this is reading from the UV space that's like, expanded, let's say. So if I select this island, I can now move it around. And if I drag it down to where my original texturing is, you can see now that the ribs are running around the edge of this. Whereas on the other side, those ribs are being stretched around. So you would really need to line this up correctly just to get the right edge flow on this. But when you've got it corrected, you would want to take this and then just retexture those pieces. So just scale this down a bit smaller. And what I'm trying to do is align this quad with this quad, this quad with this quad, this one here, and just align all these guys all the way down. And then eventually you will have a good kind of edge wrap on this. So this does take a while to fix small issues that are visible. If the issues aren't really that visible, like these edges are thick and, they're not problematic because it's a bit thinner. But if your edge is really thick, like a neckline on a t-shirt, it's worth using this little unwrapping trick to fix those edges. But in general, the exports are all quite similar in terms of how they're going to look when they're textured. It's just how they are connected and how they're joined together that is different when you import everything into Blender. So I hope that helps you guys understand a bit more about the export settings from Clo into Blender, how to set up a texture quickly, and how to check for any things that you might need to fix. Like I said, if you like this content, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave your comments down below. Check out Discord and the links in the description for some extras in Patreon.